Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, vision and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today is one of India's most distinguished lawyers, most certainly of his generation. I say has been a distinguished lawyer because at the moment he's a minister in the central government, Minister for Science and Technology, and represents a new breed of politicians, perhaps inspired by the Prime Minister, Mr. Manmohan Singh, who bring a new professionalism, a new vision, a new eloquence to the craft and functioning of politics. He's been president of the Supreme Court Bar Association. He was educated at St. Stephen's College and Harvard Law School. I'm delighted to welcome Kapil Sibal.
Thank you.
Kapil, a break of moving away from a primary profession as a lawyer and being a politician with the kind of background that you've had, and pretty much in the rough and tumble of politics. You represent Chandni Chowk, opposite the Lal Killa, the sort of the center of India in a sense. How does that transition work?
Well, quite frankly, when I entered politics, I never thought about it. I just wanted to actually be in the midst of all this, because I think that India needs committed people. It needs people who want to change and take India forward.
Was it genuinely sort of that sort of feeling of
yes.
serving, of altruism and being driven by that?
And that I did in my profession as well. This is not something that is unique to politics. When I was a lawyer, I hardly remember an occasion when somebody came to me and was in need, and I said to him, "Go away, you can't pay." It's always been my way of doing things, and I think that politics allowed me to work on a much larger canvas, and that's how I got into it.
And what have been some of the the significant compromises or concessions that you feel you might have had to make as an individual, as a person?
I have to say that none. I mean, none really that I can think of which are significant to make me think less of myself. Let's put it that way. But yes, along the way you have to go by the party's ideology. Sometimes you do feel, your conscience tells you, look, this is not the right kind of stand that the party should have taken. But then there is an element of discipline, because you're part of a structure. You can't just sort of say, so you have to compromise to that extent. But if it's fundamental to your very way of thinking, I guess then you should leave politics.
And what about developing a thick skin?
Now that, luckily for me, I haven't been at the receiving end, that I needed to develop a thick skin. I don't have a thick skin. I feel very agitated if somebody attacks me either in unsavory terms or unfairly. But I guess that it's the rough and tumble of politics. You have to accept that in the event that were to happen. I do remember that there have been occasions when this has happened and I've been very agitated, but I let it pass.
So that's sort of putting you in a spot. What might be sort of an area where you have felt at variance with the ideology of the party, or where you have felt say exceptionally sensitive to an attack on you personally that you felt was unwarranted?
Well, let's put it this way. When I entered politics, we were in opposition. And by and large, when in opposition, I was at the forefront of many issues like Pota. And I think thanks to Mrs. Gandhi, we were able to carry. There were divergent views on Pota within the party.
There still are.
There still are, and luckily we were able to carry that through. We opposed it, and I'm very glad that our government has now repealed it. You had the Securitization Act, in which I had a somewhat different view, but I went along with the party.
So as a lawyer, what is your position on Pota? at this time? I mean, there is a perception that it's being repealed, but really it's not being repealed.
Well, no. My position on POTA, our position on POTA has been consistent. The two draconian provisions of POTA, which I thought were uncivilized in nature, were that you could on the basis of a confession to a police officer convict a man, and the bail provision, which for 1 year court were not allowed to grant bail to a POTA accused unless the court was satisfied that he was innocent of the offence and that he would not in the future commit a similar act. It's impossible to satisfy the court for that, because if he is innocent, then why should he be prosecuted? So we thought that those two provisions were particularly draconian. And otherwise, POTA is good law. We have to deal with terrorism. It's an international commitment. And that's all that we objected to, even when we opposed POTA.
So in a sense, sort of, POTA is being repealed, but not repealed, which sort of would be it's being modified.
We know it's made more civilized. It has been made more consistent with our constitutional value system, and our cultural values, and the way we look at individual liberty.
Just going back to this notion of politics, because in some ways you surprise me and you surprise us with your sort of benevolent, contrary perception to what we have on the outside. Politics is dirty business. You have tainted ministers. It's controversy. It's pulling people down. It's corrupt.
But Rajiv, it's up to you. I mean, nothing prevents you to become tainted. Nothing prevents you to be clean. And you see, there is a difference, I think, for those who came into politics at the grassroots level, who you fought panchayat elections at the block level, councillors, you've risen up the scale, so to say. And in the course of all that, you develop a lot of enmities. The political process is such that it's quite easy to actually foist a case on your enemy. And then, of course, if you are part of the, those who agitate, you break the law and you go into jail. And then, in many states, I find chief ministers who come to power make sure that they target their enemies in the opposition and then foist cases on them. So it's partly that, and partly the fact that if somebody else has foisted a case on you, you say, when you are in power, let me sort of do the same thing on him. So in a way, it's the exchange amongst that takes place between political personalities in the political process that gets you tainted. We luckily entered politics at another level altogether, and we haven't had to go through it, except for a couple of elections that I have fought. And luckily for me, I had really no problems in the course of those elections.
And what happens in Parliament when you see people rushing to the well of the House and picking up a microphone?
I feel distraught.
What have you?
I feel distraught.
But how do you relate to that, in the sense of in some ways you're obliged to respond instead of just sitting there and passively waiting?
We do respond. I have to tell you that when many of those things used to happen when we were in opposition, sometimes I felt that the party was not taking the appropriate decision, when we would voice our views in the morning meetings that we had with Mrs. Gandhi presiding over those meetings. And then, of course, there would be a divergence of opinion, and then ultimately what the party decided had to be accepted. And therefore, to that extent, there is that element of compromise. But it's not fundamental to your entire way of thinking. I mean, if it were something, if somebody were to say, look, you are in this ministry, the party wants you to collect this thing, or that you should make in this contract, you get this commission, that's fundamental to whatever you have stood for, in which case it's better to quit than to do that.
Is that unique for your ministry, and because there's someone like you running it?
I think it's partly unique. Of course, if you want to make money, you can make money out of anything. It's also a mindset. But I think this Ministry of Science and Technology is unique. There is very little, bureaucracy involved. The bureaucracy are the scientists. The levels of discourse within the ministry are extremely high. We're dealing with high technology stuff, and we're dealing with the future of the country, what the country needs in, say, 2025. And so, I never thought of these things.
But you're working in the context of a cultural environment. Nehru talked about the need to cultivate a scientific temper. it's in your hands.
Absolutely.
Ministry of Science and Technology.
Absolutely.
What is your agenda? Beyond obviously the specifics, you're working on an aircraft, you want to work on areas of biotechnology, but in terms of this larger spirit of
I think
curiosity.
I'm really passionate about this. If I cannot do something in the course of the next 1 or 2 years, then it's not my worth being here. So I'm really passionate on this. I think we need to develop a scientific temper right from the school level upwards. I've persuaded the Prime Minister. We proposed that he set up a scientific advisory committee to the Prime Minister, which he announced recently when we gave the Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Awards, just before his trip to the United States.
But are you fearful that the committees and processes and systems?
No.
And so what is your agenda?
What we need to do is to set up a committee of pure professionals, no politicians, right, who have a vision for the future. And we have such people in our country, men of enormous integrity and enormous talent. And we are going to pick a few of them. It's not going to be a large committee. And then give them the power, the authority to actually have a vision for India, and then allow and make sure that it's implemented.
So what might be some of the mechanisms that
For example, one of the things I would like to do, and I would like the committee actually to look into it, we've launched the EduSat. Now, one of the biggest problems in this country is primary and secondary education. 36% of our people are still illiterate. Mrs. Gandhi is extremely committed to the cause of education. In fact, we've upped the budget on primary and elementary education to almost 5,000 crores. The midday meal scheme money is in fact also been, there's greater allocation to 3,000 crores. If we cannot educate our children through the normal processes where teachers are not available in rural areas, in other words, if the vehicles of education used so far have failed, we need a paradigm shift and adopt new vehicles of education.
But are you convinced that a paradigm shift that is technology driven, instead of really being content driven, is really going to work?
No, it will be content driven.
Because we've had the experience with sort of Gyan Darshan and so many initiatives, and we're held up, and they're held up as for the amounts of money that are being spent.
I'll tell you the problem.
Technology and nothing happens. There's no impact.
You're right, Rajiv. The problem is the following: if you leave it entirely to the state, if you expect the government of India to prepare the software for what's going to be taught to children, then I think you're barking up the wrong tree. What we need is a public-private partnership. And one of the things that I've decided to do is to call private entrepreneurs, TV channels, private TV channels, have a public-private partnership and say, all right, you prepare the software. We have a satellite. We'll give you the satellite and give you as much time as you want. But you prepare world-class software, because the consumer has a choice. Sitting in front of the TV, he has 50 channels before him. You must prepare a kind of software where the child will say, I want to watch that program.
But is this sort of A, commercially viable, and B,
Yes.
I think very significantly that in a sense with public broadcasting in India, and then this is a parallel to that, sort of a parallel stream I think to the what the public broadcaster is doing, it hasn't really worked.
No, but it can work provided there's something in it for the private entrepreneur. If the private entrepreneur says, if he produces a world-class software and shows it to children, and he uses the money, uses the time that he can earn on the advertisements, which he can, because the range of Doordarshan is more than any other channel. So there's a lot of advertisement money that's available there, and he can take a share of that advertisement money.
But it's been frequently argued that the role of commercially driven television is really to deliver audiences to advertisers and not really content to audiences.
What about a children's program which like you had on American television on
Sesame
Channel 30.
Street, and
Sesame
there are many
Street.
examples
Sesame Street,
of that.
Sesame
but I think
Street.
philosophically, it's been demonstrated that the minute you want to reach out to audiences that don't have purchasing power, advertisers are not really interested.
That's not true, but this will be seen by everybody, including the urban middle classes in the big cities. Sesame Street is not for the rural areas alone. It will be for everybody. And in fact, you can turn this channel into an edutainment channel. You can have entertainment in the evening and education in the morning. So, there are lots of mixes that you can do. And I'm not going to give up merely because in the past, nothing was able to be done.
So this is a context, in a sense, for some of your more youthful, creative instincts to find expression and find space. Tell us about that. When you were sort of much younger in college, you had the sort of interest in theatre and in the creative arts. What happened to that? Do you sort of mourn its loss?
No.
Or was it just youthful exuberance?
No. It was just a way of expressing yourself in a different sort of kind of way. Theatre is in a way an expression of your inner self. It's just a mode of expression. Politics is yet another mode of expression. So I don't think that merely because I left theatre I've lost out in something. No, I think that lawyering itself is also is a mode of expression. It's the manner in which you project the matter in court that's ultimately very important, apart, of course, from the content and the substance. But manner is as important as the substance. And so also in politics. I think that a lot of us forget that in politics what you project is as important as what you say. And so I think there is a commonality in all this, and I've not lost out anywhere.
Some of the other significant agendas for your ministry, you have, soon after you came in and took charge, there was this, you talked about biotechnology. You have been a vociferous supporter of HIV/AIDS and combating that. What is the passion? The principal passion, if it's possible to have a principal passion.
It's just passionate about life. It's passionate about how others feel, what state others are in. I think the most humbling experience that one can have is actually fight an election and go out there and watch how people smile despite the fact that they live in utter penury. There is a smile on their face. So there is hope. And I think that you ought to appreciate that smile and realize that man is willing to adjust to anything, provided he thinks that tomorrow is going to be better. I think the politician's task is to make that tomorrow better. And so that's the passion. That's the passion, whether it's in biotech or it's in discovering a new molecule in the field of medicine. It gives you such a thrill if you know that down the road you have made a difference, or you can make a difference. And if you're able to do that, I think life is really worth living.
Were you sort of, I know you've been asked this question a zillion times, but were you disappointed that you weren't sort of Minister for Law or a law minister, because that's your area of specialization and what have you? I don't mean this as a political benchmark of achievement, but sort of.
Lots of people have asked me that question, and I have to say that I, for one, and this is something that I'm worried about. Ever since I became Minister of Science and Technology, I never ever thought that I ever went to a court of law. Law was a means for me for livelihood. It turned out to be pretty good for me. I have a passion for law, there is no doubt about it, but I have a passion for life. And I think science and technology, if I look at it in the larger context, will contribute much greater to the development of this nation and to future generations than law. What we need is a total transformation of the legal system. We need some major surgery. What we need in science and technology is to carry the battle forward in our fight against nature, to be able to overcome it to the extent that we can, and therefore benefit mankind. I think the benefits in science and technology are much larger. No, I was not disappointed at all. In fact, I think that I would not give this ministry up for anything. I love this ministry. But let me say another thing to you. One of the things that I have been thinking as Minister of Science and Technology is, what can I do for law? And I've come up with something.
You mean the application of science and technology to law?
Exactly. And I've
come
up with something, or we're going to have a major meet, a brainstorming on the 7th of November, which has already been fixed. I want to actually change the whole investigative process through technology. One of the biggest problems that our country has today is that the police officer is in charge of the investigating process, and he can actually manipulate a lot of things in the course of the investigation. Can technology provide an answer? And if we are able to solve that, in other words, if the foundation is strong, then no lies can be built upon that foundation. So one of my major tasks in the Ministry of Science and Technology is to actually allow technology to be used by the investigator to ensure that he does not manipulate the investigative process. And that's something that I'm really passionate about.
So at the end of your presumably 4 years and some months as Minister of Science and Technology, what would you like to have achieved? What would you like people to say? He was Minister for 5 years and this is what he did.
Well, I think that it's very difficult to really to think in those terms. But if I went out of this ministry 5 years from now and people said he made a difference, that's enough for me.
What aspiration do you have for yourself in politics? In some ways, it almost sounds disarmingly perfect. The notion that you wish to serve and you surrender to the process of serving, a context that politics provides. I suspect we've gotten so used and habituated to associating, the notion of the pursuit of power with politics, that it sort of becomes difficult to reconcile with the notion of pure altruism and coexisting with public life.
In my life, and I have been in various positions, even in the course of your profession, you control a lot of people. I mean, in your private world, you do control a lot of people. But I have never in my life exercised power. I always had it, never exercised it. And I have never exercised power even as a politician. I never say to somebody, without any discussion, you do this because I want you to do this. No, that's not my way. And I think that if politicians were to realize that, and I think Dr. Manmohan Singh is an ideal example, the way in which he carries people with him, that doesn't mean he doesn't have a point of view. But you always take decisions in the context of the situation and what generally people want you to do, right? And I can feel the pulse of the scientific community within my ministry. They want change, they want autonomy, they want excellence, they want freedom in their joints, they don't want any bureaucratization, they want commitment in R&D, they want to serve, their passion is science, they want to serve the cause of science for humanity. What you have to do is to give them direction. For example, one of the things I said was, look, don't make investments in technology which will bypass the common man. If you bypass the common man, what's the use of your technology? So make sure. So that's direction. I'll give you freedom. I don't want to interfere as to who should be a director of this laboratory. In fact, I've sent a circular, probably you don't know, many people don't know. I've sent a circular to all the directors of all my laboratories in the CSIR, in fact in the Science and Technology Ministry. Whoever lobbies with me for a position will be automatically disqualified. I think the scientists want that, because the scientists want to choose their own peers, their own people, so that the cause of science is served. We must give that environment to them. We want regulation. For example, one of the things we've been talking about is that, animal testing has been prohibited in this country. There's a large section of people in this country who don't like animals to be tested. And I think there is a point of view. But the fact of the matter is, without animal testing, you cannot go for the next stage, that is human testing. Now, our scientists and our labs have to fly out to do the animal tests, which in fact increases the expenditure on R&D.
Much of this derives from a personal, a structure of a personal moral philosophy, a vision, a view of life, and it often derives from religion or spirituality or a strong moral framework. What is it for you? Do you have a religious framework that you respond to?
No. No. If I at the end of the day can sleep well at night and ask myself the question, have I harmed anybody during the day? And the answer is no, I haven't. That's morality for me. God and all that is lip service to something that we believe in, an extraterrestrial power, extra celestial power. But no, I believe in goodness.
Kapil Sibal, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure.
Thank you.